While we are all waiting for Preludes 13, I thought, why not do a quick, purely imaginary Smite rework, just for fun, to spark some discussion and get the build crafting folks to throw their own ideas into the mix. I'm not going to recap the current Smite setup. If you're here, you already know it. The short version is Smite currently does a lot of once, and that makes it feel more central than most Pact abilities. So here's the thought experiment. How do we turn Smite from the main event into the glue that makes weapons, enemies and pacts actually interact? Assuming full design freedom, breaking systems apart, rebuilding them, planning for future updates, what would I change? Quick disclaimer here, this is light-hearted brainstorming. We are not the dev team, we are not dealing with real-world constraints like production schedules, dependencies and limited team capacity. This is just a creative mind game, and you're absolutely invited to jump in with your own version. So let's start. Let's break it down into 3 axes. The enemy axis, the weapon axis and the pact axis. Also, let's use a more general name, because this becomes more complex and more like a framework than a single mechanic, and call it Fey-Power Framework as a placeholder working title. Now to the enemy axis. First, we are making enemy souls into a clearly communicated resource mechanic that also powers enemy diversification. So we create 2 base soul types, soul fragments and soul shards. Every enemy gets a small blue second bar under their health bar that represents how much soul bar damage they can take before their soul fragment or soul shard breaks loose, so to speak. When you hit them with soul damage, you see the bar going down, and every time it passes a threshold, a floating shard or fragment disjoints and starts hovering in the world as an interactable object. In other words, you can consume it. The separation between those will make more sense once we are in the Pact section. But for the enemy side, it's important to note that fragments exist on basically every enemy with a soul, even the small ones, and shards only exist on elite enemies or bosses. Something else to note, it's possible that some enemies types carry more than one soul type. For example, a boss with 3 phases could have 1 fragment in its first 2 phases and the shard limited to its 3rd phase, giving you something to work for gradually while going through that enemy. Now, let's split enemies into a few soul types independent of their faction. First, the normal living beings. They carry untyped default soul fragments and shards. Nothing special here. Second, void souls. Basically, no soul. Some creatures, for example oozes, aberrations, cold undead beings or a poor living being that you are just stripped the soul away from, could be typed as void soul. These would create some sort of nullifier light type of challenge. You wouldn't be able to access all your tools here, but also not be negated completely. Third, empowered souls. Think of these as enemies where special rules are applied to the soul they carry. You can think of them as upgraded variants that come with additional modifiers. For example, a heavy with a benefactor soul shard regularly pulls out empowering and probably slightly healing waves around him. And the moment you rip his soul out of his body, he loses that power. And yes, this system could also be used to give the player additional temporary powers or buffs when they reap these souls, degrading the enemy to a normal human in the process. And last but not least, corrupted souls. These are meant to be special encounters, distorted, possessed beings. Think of the boar from Princess Mononoke. This is where Smite becomes a horror button. You don't just win, you reveal what was hiding. The thematic idea here is that some creatures are still wearing a living soul as a disguise. An aggressive, raging but otherwise normal looking boar, and only when you reap its living soul, the corrupted soul underneath breaks free. At that moment, the creature doesn't just change mechanically, it visibly unravels. The corruption surfaces, the body warps, and it turns from wild animal into something openly unnatural and hostile. And the best part is, reaping that corrupted soul after the fight could be optional, because it might grant a lot of power, but also hit you with a massive, long-lasting debuff. Now, let's go to the second axis. Here we are building an actual combat loop for harvesting that resource and implement the ability to customize it in your build crafting. The core idea here is to expand the spirit side system we already have, integrate it into the framework and upgrade it into a full spirit phasing action. Think of it not as simply looking into the spirit world and highlighting items, but giving you the ability to actually exist on both sides at the same time. More like the Lord of the Rings Nazgul or something like that. We now establish a new simple resource, a spirit bar. This is a meter that determines how long you can stay in the spirit world. It is consumed by phasing in, and it drains even more with every action you perform. So the spirit bar directly limits your uptime versus enemy souls. When phased, you stay attackable from the physical world and you can still damage enemies physically, but your action now also affects the spirit world. In spirit phase, the enemy's soul bar becomes the primary bar in the UI. Every attack against an enemy will damage their soul bar and will eventually split soul shards and soul fragments in the process. And if you empty it completely, the enemy enters a hollowed state. If you keep attacking an enemy whose soul has been fully drained while you are in spirit phase, interacting with that hollowed void creates tremendous distortion in you and your enemy, destabilizing both of you. This makes the enemy significantly more vulnerable to your attacks from the physical world, but at the same time it drains your life and hits you with healing resistance debuffs. So you get a real decision, cash out safely or go full greed and pay in blood. Instead of automatically activating every time we smite an enemy, they would fill your weapon up with the devoured soul. Imagine a small meter on the right side of the screen showing your weapon frame and how it's being filled with soul juice. The higher the rune power meter is filled, the more devastating the rune activation will be. There could be different tiers and the next tier would always take longer to fill than the previous one, so it creates a decision. Do you want to spam your rune powers more often or keep it for one hefty burst moment? Making the rune system something you can activate on demand was an idea from one of my viewers from the last video. Great stuff. To make the whole spirit phase thing more exciting as an actual progression system, we would need to add a few slots to our current totem and rune loadout system. Adjacent to our current totems, we could add 3 more slots that are reserved for unlocking special buffs and actions that are active while you are phased. The first slot would take an offensive spirit bar consuming maneuver. Think of it as a special action that overrides default maneuvers and it drains the bar rapidly. Basically, mythic versions of the special moves you know from Dynasty Warriors games or something like that. For example, whirling your spear in a wide arc, continuously attacking the souls of surrounding enemies until your bar depletes and you are expelled from the phase, or a devastating soul backstab with a dagger. So you get flashy, powerful mystic moves, but they are self-balancing because they literally burn your time in the realm. The second slot would take utility upgrades, like dodging transforming into a phase teleport, or changing a counter parry into a spirit blast riposte, or allowing you to heal a portion of your HP when devouring a soul fragment, stuff like that. And healing tied to this would have to be modest, so it doesn't make every other sustain tool feel pointless. And the third slot could yield buffs like getting strong damage resistance against attacks from the physical world while phased, or giving your attacks extended reach, or things like that. This slot is basically about which general stat lines are getting buffed: throughput, resistance, uptime, your choice. With these 3 slots on both weapons, this would create a totem-like upgrade path that could be extended in the future and allows you to create your own set of advantages linked to the smiting process. A system like this could be used in different scenarios, not only for smiting. For example, you could design level architecture where certain puzzles only work while phased, or even platforms that can only be accessed while in spirit form. On the other hand, you could create enemies that are native to the spirit world. For example, the specters from the crypts could mostly exist there, while only briefly entering the physical plane to attack mortals. So your best chance is to go into their realm. Or you could add weak points to enemies that only exist while phased. In broader terms, spirit phase becomes a second layer of gameplay, not just a combat modifier. Spirit world only threats could also create a risk versus reward scenario where, in a boss fight for example, the boss souls is wide open with plenty of juicy fragments and multiple shards to be earned, but there are also multiple spirit wards in the room that only exist there, and the moment you are phasing, they start firing, exposing you to more attacks in the process. And of course, it would be awesome if we could adjust general spirit phase characteristics like the length of our spirit bar and how quickly it regenerates. Since they are already reworking virtues currently and we don't know how those systems will look in the future, I'm not trying to factor any of that in. But in general, tying Spirit Shift and the Spirit Bar to the Spirit Virtue would be a great way to create a clear build decision between physical playstyles and a more Smite-oriented playstyle. That would finally make Spirit builds feel like a real archetype, not just a stat theme. The key limiter here is the Spirit Bar. You won't have permanent Spirit phase uptime, and how long you can stay phased and how fast you regenerate would be heavily influenced by your build. In a virtue-driven setup, Spirit-focused characters would phase longer and strip soul bars faster, while courage-focused physical builds would have shorter phases and profit more from the hollowed state this creates. That's the core idea. And now let's move on to Axis 3. Here we are making the soul resource actually power your pact mechanics. The design here is to allow them to actually have powerful abilities, but also intrinsically balance their uptime and accessibility. So every pact would get a soul fragment related passive. This one is very simple. Whenever you consume a soul fragment, your pact passive builds up. These passives are meant to be stacked. It's not meant to be one ultra powerful ability that's on or off, but more like a small upgrade you can collect by harvesting more fragments. So even small fights matter. Every fragment is progress toward bringing your pact theme online. Here are a few examples. Orengal could have a passive where you bank Spirit of the Pack stacks. Whenever you perform a triggering maneuver, for example heavy attacks, finishers or fully charged bowshot, one stack gets depleted and a Spirit Wolf spawns for a few seconds to join you in the attack. That would feel like your pact echoes your gameplay rhythm instead of being a separate cooldown button. An internal cooldown and a limited lifetime duration could cap how many of those short-lived wolves can exist at once. The fact that you can stack the passive means the effect will stay with you for a bit. If you can manage to stack 12 by absorbing a lot of fragments in short succession, you can control how many you want to release over time, while still preventing you from mass summoning all of them in one burst through the internal cooldown. It would make hunting fragments and stacking them relevant without creating a binary now you're overpowered and now you're not situation, while still rewarding you for getting as many smites as possible. Other examples for fragment passives could be Tethrin gaining rage stacks that activate a berserker mode on a trigger effect, stronger the more stacks you spend. Bromius getting a soul jar of honey that fills up, and you can devour it for tank style self-regeneration effects. Siren being accompanied by little pixie stacks that when triggered search out enemies like homing projectiles, marking weak spots, tripping enemies, bringing you extra loot or buffs, or even showing you where a hidden stash is under the rainbow. Then we have the other thing, soul shards. This is where we could bring back the idea of a pact ultimate that is currently so fiercely missing from the game. Since shards are limited by definition, they are the perfect point to allow pacts some OP moments. So ultimates aren't cooldown spam, they are earned power spikes. The core idea here is that every ability of each pact has a secondary activation. After consuming a soul shard, all your pact abilities get empowered and start glowing. And the next one you activate will create an upgraded version of that ability. Siren's decoy could become an actual fighting doppelganger. Werewalker could allow you to really fight in wolf form for a moment, trashing enemies left and right. Call of the Ancients could summon an entire battle standard, rallying all allies around Tethrin for as long as they are fighting near the banner and giving escalating buffs. Your pact gets a brief legendary version without permanent power creep and is naturally limited through the sparseness of soul shards on enemies. So to recap, in practice you keep slipping into the spirit phase to target souls, not healths, and every successful reap feeds the whole build. Your rune meter, your rolling pact passive and one empowered pact cast when it matters. Enemies define the soul resource, weapons define how you harvest it, and packs define how you spend it. So Smite stops being the main event and becomes the glue. But as you probably realized, I left a few things out. How should soul reaping work in multiplayer? Shared drops or per player instances? How fast should the spirit bar regenerate, and should you be able to influence it through upgrades or actions? While phased, should physical damage be reduced, or should the trade-off stay purely in spirit bar uptime and regen? I'm not going to do all the work alone here, you can contribute too. If you could change one thing about Smite, what would it be? Tell me your Smite system rework. What would you change, or what would you adjust in the system I presented? Or just tell me what you liked and what you didn't. I'm eager to hear what you can come up with. And yeah, that's my few minutes of creativity to fill the empty space while we wait for Prelude 13. See you there, envoys!